محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم أنت البلاغ اللهم أنت المستعان وعليك البلاغ ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بك. Last week we were talking about some of the history of Quraysh before Islam, before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for those of you who were here, we talked about one man in particular who was responsible for making Quraysh, who was Qusay ibn Kilab. And basically that, in the book by Martin Lings, that is summed up very nicely in the 3rd chapter. We talked about how the origin of Quraysh came to be and how Qusay and the people that he gathered came to be in charge of Mecca. And one of the last things that we were talking about there was the different offices that either came with custodianship of Mecca or that Qusay created and passed down to his descendants. And we mentioned 6 different things. What were they?
Gatekeeper.
Tax? Yeah, well, that's what they, it's the word is rifada, which means like a tax, but it's the catering. Because the person who is in charge of that, like everybody else from Quraysh, gives him a tribute and he provides the catering to the pilgrims. Another one was gatekeeping. Another one,
Water supply.
yes. Providing water for the pilgrims when they come to Mecca for Hajj. These 3 offices are more or less religious offices. They have to do with being custodians of the Kaaba, the Haram. There are 3 other responsibilities that are more political that we talked about. What were they? The standard bearer. What is a standard bearer? What does that mean?
They get to declare war.
Yeah, they're the ones who Quraysh can't declare war, and they can't unless that person ties the standard for them. And they hold the standard in battle, which this position it's a significant position and a significant military position among a lot of peoples. In the Roman army, there was a position. Even in this country, in the Civil War, there was this position of standard bearing. Standard bearer. Another one was
Chief Marshal.
The field marshal, and the field marshal is like the commander of the army in battle, or even the leader of the caravan when they're not in battle. And the last one was? Yeah. That it's like the speaker of the house, the leader of the town hall or the senate or whatever you want to call it. What did Quraysh call that particular assembly that they had? Dar al-Nadwa. These were 6 different things that were in the hands of Qusay during his life. Qusay had 4 sons. Who were they? Abd al-Dar, Abd Manaf, Abd al-Uzza, and Abd. And he has that tree somewhere in the book by Martin Links. The tradition says that, who was the eldest son? No. Abd al-Dar was the eldest son. But in his lifetime, Abd Manaf had achieved a lot of status, a lot of wealth, a lot of influence. And he kind of outshone his elder brother, Abd al-Dar. They say that in order to restore the balance between the two, Qusay and his wife, who was Hubba, the son of Hulayl, for the chief from Khuza'ah, entrusted all of these responsibilities to Abd al-Dar and his descendants. At some point in time, whether it was during the life of the grandsons of Qusay and the children of Abd al-Dar and Abd Manaf, or even later, conflict arose among these things. And that was because the sons of Abd Manaf were greater in number and more wealthy and more prestigious and more influential than the sons of Abd al-Dar. So they wanted to claim these things, or some of them, for themselves. جزاك الله خير. That created a conflict, and the different factions among Quraysh were divided in 2 sides. One half of the clans from Quraysh sided with Abd Manaf, and the other half sided with Abd al-Dar. The clans that sided with Abd Manaf were, there's a clan called Asad, a clan called Taym, a clan called Zuhra, and a clan called Al-Harith. the clans that sided with Abd ad-Dar. There were 4 clans that sided with Abd Manaf. There were 4 clans that sided with Abd ad-Dar. There were Makhzum, Adi, Makhzum, Adi, Jumah, and Sahm. At some point in history, this conflict, it came very close to being an actual battle. And they had actually taken up arms and made war plans. And each side made like an oath of allegiance, like an oath of loyalty. And they say this side made an oath by dipping their hands into, no, not this side, the other side. They dipped their hands into something nicer. Perfume, into scent. And they were known as al-Tayyabin, which means the perfumed ones. He mentions that somewhere, he calls them the scented ones, somewhere in that Seerah book. And these, they made an oath of loyalty as well. According to some traditions, they dipped their hands into blood. And they said one of them licked the blood off his hands. They were called the Ahlaf, which means the allies. That, however, it was resolved without actually coming to war. And Quraysh in Jahiliyyah is noted for never actually having a war among itself. There are other big tribes in Jahiliyyah that are famous for having long-standing feuds that lasted for decades in Jahiliyyah, but Quraysh, here the actual war was averted, and it never happened in Jahiliyyah. And they were real keen on that, not fighting among each other and maintaining unity, which had to do with their position among other people. It never actually came to a fight, and it was resolved, and those different offices would be divided among the sons of Abd Manaf and among Abd ad-Dar. So 3 were given to Abd Manaf, and 3 were given to Abd ad-Dar. The 3 that were given to Abd Manaf, and I think I made a mistake when I was talking about this last week. The 3 that were given to Abd Manaf were which ones? What did I say last week?
The religious ones?
Yeah, 2 of the religious ones. One of the other ones. They were given.
Gatekeeper and water supply?
What's that?
Gatekeeper and water supply?
They weren't given they weren't the gatekeeper. They were the water supply and the caterer and the marshal. And then when we look down in the future generations, Abd Manaf had 4 sons who were
Hasim.
Hashim,
Al-Muttalib.
Al-Muttalib,
Nawfal.
Nawfal,
Abdul Shah.
and
The shows.
yes, I'm trying to find split. These 2, supplying water and catering, they came to Hashim. And Hashim was legendary for being very wealthy and very lavish in the things that he provided. He's credited with being the one who got like the privilege of Quraysh to make the different trade routes to the north, his other brothers are credited with doing that as well, but he said he's the first one who initiated it, establishing the privilege of having these trade routes to the north and the south and the east and the west. These were given, he was in charge of that in his life. One of his sons, which is he's the only son of his that has a legacy. Who's the son of Hashim? Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib did that in his, after he was gone. Abdul Muttalib was very wealthy, as his father was, carried that on after him. Abdul Muttalib had a lot of sons. For example, yes, Abu Talib and Al-Abbas, Hamza, Al-Harith, Abdullah. Ja'far is the son of Abu Talib. Yeah, he had a lot of sons. There are 2 here that we are. There was Abbas and no. After Abdul Muttalib, Al-Abbas took over the supplying the water, and Abu Talib took over feeding the pilgrims. This, the Al-Abbas supplying the water, that continued until after Islam, and you even read in Sahih al-Bukhari that Al-Abbas, when the Prophet ﷺ came to make Hajj, Al-Abbas asked permission from the Prophet ﷺ, instead of staying in Mina, where all of the people making Hajj are staying after Eid, he asked permission to stay in Mecca because he had to take care of that the water supply, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed him to do so. And until very recently, there was and you'll see this even in old photographs of the Haram, there was a structure inside in the courtyard of the Kaaba. They call it Siqayat al-Abbas. It was like a cistern where water was collected, and it was made available to the people coming into the Kaaba. This tradition in Jahiliyyah, there were some aspects to this that they say that the pilgrims were not allowed to bring their own food into the haram. They had to eat what Quraysh provided for them. That disappeared. But after Islam, it was for centuries, it was a tradition carried on by the khulafa. Whoever was in charge, whoever was the governor of Mecca, was responsible for providing that hospitality to the pilgrims if they needed it. That's two. The other one being the marshal, or being the leader of the caravans, that was taken by Abd Shams. Abd Shams two of his sons were Harb and Umayyah. And apparently this was shared between the sons of Abd Shams. It was shared between those two when they were alive. No, wait. That's not right. It's Umayyah and Rabi'a. And Umayyah had a son called Harb. I'm just going to erase the rest of this to make that bigger. This Umayyah, he's the one that centuries later, his name would become very famous and part of history. As yes? The Banu Umayyah, the dynasty of Khulafa, that's him. He's Umayyah, the one who lived in Jahiliyyah, because they're all from that family. Umayyah had a son called Harb. And we see in Jahiliyyah, it's Harb ibn Umayyah. He's the marshal of Quraysh in the war that they had in Jahiliyyah, the famous war they had in Jahiliyyah, which was called, what was it called? We talked about, when we talked about the early life of the Prophet ﷺ.
Fijar?
The Fijar. He was the marshal of Quraysh. He was the one who led them on the battlefield. Rabi'a, some of his sons were Utbah and Shaybah, and we'll see in the Battle of Badr, we'll see them in the Battle of Badr. What happened to them?
They're executed?
What's that?
Were they taken prisoner?
No.
Oh.
It was before that. It was the very beginning of the battle. Utbah ibn Rabi'a, he's in charge of the army. And actually he tries to get them to go back, but Abu Jahl shames him and insists on staying put. Utbah, Shayba, and Utbah's son, whose also, his name was, it was Al-Walid. When the two camps, when the two parties face off, Utbah, his brother Shayba, and his son Al-Walid ibn Utbah, they come out and challenge the Muslims to a single combat, to a duel. And they're met by Hamza, Ali, and Ubaidah ibn al-Harith, who is part of the family of the Prophet ﷺ as well. Part of the events that led up to Badr. What led up to Badr? Why did they leave Medina in the first place?
They were trying to get the caravan of Abu Sufyan.
There was a caravan. That caravan had a leader, and the leader of the caravan, person in charge of the caravan was Abu Sufyan, who is the son of Harb. So you'll see him being in charge of the caravan there, while his cousins are in charge of the army. After Badr, it's Abu Sufyan who leads the army of Quraysh to Medina. When? In Uhud. And then after that, when they laid siege to Medina in the battle they called the Khandaq, the trench, or the Ahzab. He's the one in charge of the army. He's the head of the army. Utbah had a daughter whose name was Walid is a boy's name. He had a daughter. A daughter is a girl like that. Hind. He had a daughter named... Yes, she was married to Abu Sufyan. She's the mother of a number of children. One of them is Muawiyah. That is why she had a vendetta, a grudge against Hamza in particular. She wanted to get revenge against him. That's Abd Manaf. Can I erase this? No? Actually, for Abd Dar, I have something easier. So can you get that some of the sisters? This is part of Abd Dar. The family is much bigger than this. There are a lot of lines left off. It's not comprehensive. But Abd Dar took on the responsibility of what 3 things? No, the water and cake, that's Abd Manaf. All these 3 things belong to Abd Manaf.
That's your
The whole, being the okay, gatekeeping, holding the key to the Kaaba. That ended up, and keep this and hold on to this because this we'll see these events later. That ended up with Abu Talha here. And it eventually went down to Uthman here, and then Shayba. Is that the last one here? That to this day, it's in the sons of Shayba in Mecca. To this day, and the Prophet ﷺ himself, when Mecca surrendered, he took the key from him to go inside the Kaaba, and then they say Al-Abbas requested to be given the privilege of holding the key in addition to the privilege he already had, but the Prophet ﷺ gave it back to Uthman here. And he said, take it in your family forever. No one will ever have the right to take it from you again. So until this day, it's in the sons of Shayba in particular. And you can actually, on Wikipedia, at least the Arabic Wikipedia, they have a list of all of the generations of the one who was holding the key. From the time of Jahiliyyah up to this day. It's still, I mean, if the kings or want to open the Kaaba for visitors, they ask them. And they have their own, the family has their own customs of opening the Kaaba and cleaning the Kaaba. And what would it, the oldest one alive is the one who actually holds the key, but they will all go and whenever it's going to be opened, they give the entire family notice and they all go and open it as a group. And if there are female visitors, the women will come and host them and take them into the Kaaba. So that's from the time, from Jahiliyyah until this day, that's in the hands of that family. Another thing that was there was the Dar al-Nadwa, which is like the town hall or the Senate. And that somehow in Jahiliyyah, a man named Hakim ibn Hizam bought that from them. And Hakim ibn Hizam was the nephew of Khadija. And they're from Banu al-Asad, who goes back to Abdul Uzza ibn Qusay. Anyway, that's a general truth. If you have a lot of money, it doesn't matter who your father was. So Hakim ibn Hizam bought that house in Jahiliyyah, and later on, after Islam, he sold it to Muawiyah. And all of these things are kind of like status symbols and things of prestige. When he sold that to Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, after when Muawiyah was Khalifa, someone said to him that, hey, how could you sell the makrama of Quraysh, the honor of Quraysh or the prestige of Quraysh? And he said, ذهبت المكارم إلا التقوى. He said, there's no such thing as prestige anymore except for piety. And so he sold it, and he took them and he gave it to he donated the money he was given to the army. The last privilege that Abd ad-Dar had was what?
Standard.
Holding the standard. And if you look here, that on the day of Uhud, there was 1, 2, no, not him, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think 7, 8, 9 of the people here were killed holding the standard on the day of Uhud. Until there was none of them left, and one of their slaves had to hold it up. And he was killed as well. In total, 11 people from Abd ad-Dar were killed holding the standard on the day of Uhud. And later on, Hassan ibn Thabit from the Ansar would say to Quraysh, ألا أبلغ أبا سفيان عني فأنت مجوف نخب هواء بأن سيوفنا تركتك عبدا وعبد الدار سادتها الإماء. He would taunt them that our swords turned you into a slave. Meaning that holding the standard is a station of prestige, and the most prestigious among the people are the ones who hold the standard. They were all done away with until they couldn't find anyone to hold the standard except one of their slaves. So he said that, which is not politically correct, but he was taunting them. On the day of Uhud, also on the other side, the Ansar have a standard and the Muhajirin have a standard. The one holding the standard of the Muhajirin was who? He was killed, radiallahu anhu. And when he was killed, some people thought it was the Prophet ﷺ who was killed, because they were suited in armor. And because the chief is usually next to the standard bearer. Who was that who was killed? Later on, someone would say that when we buried him, we couldn't find enough material to cover all of his body. Who was it? He was the...
Very rich earlier.
Yeah, because he's from this prestigious family. He was the first one, or one of the first ones that the Prophet ﷺ sent to Medina to teach them Quran. Mus'ab, can you find him here?
Mus'ab ibn Umair?
Yeah. Mus'ab. Umair is his father. And he had a brother who wasn't Muslim. In fact, he was very hostile. They say Qusay in Jahiliyyah, he was one of maybe 2 people in Ma'ad. Who is Ma'ad? Adnan, the half of the Arabs that aren't Yemen, that aren't Qahtan. A lot of Qahtan, they have like a feudal system and they're kings. Qusay was one exception that when he was alive, he was like a king. His people treated him like a king. Like he was the authority. There was way back in ancient history, there was another man called Kulayb ibn Wa'il, who was said to have the same kind of authority. He ended up being killed, and that started a long feud. But after Qusay, Quraysh didn't treat any one other person as a king after him. There would be particular people who were like judges. They would call them hukam. They had a certain amount of authority and clout, and they would settle disputes. One of them, for example, was Nufail, who was the grandfather of Umar ibn Khattab. One of them was a man named Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, who was the father of Khalid ibn al-Walid. And he would have been the uncle of Abu Jahl and Salama as well. There was a man named Abdullah ibn Jud'an, who is from Taym, where Abu Bakr is from. There is Abu Talib, was said to be like that as well in Jahiliyyah. And even Quraysh enjoyed a particular special kind of status and prestige among the rest of the Arabs in Jahiliyyah. But even among themselves, there's no one person that they will treat like a king. And even Quraysh, even though they have a special kind of status and prestige among the rest of Ma'ad, no one else treats them like a king. They don't have it's not to the point where they rule over other people. Sometimes they will settle other people's conflicts for them. Sometimes other people will take them to settle their differences, but they're not ruling over anyone else. There are some other, because of that position that Quraysh enjoyed, there are some other like offices that are said to have been held in Jahiliyyah. Like they say, there was a man named Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, who was like the ambassador of Quraysh. And if Quraysh had to send a representative to talk to another people, it would be Umar ibn Khattab in his lifetime. And they say that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would settle feuds between other people, which means if there's a blood feud between other people, in order to satisfy both sides and get them to stop fighting, sometimes a person who's not even involved will come and say, I will pay who was killed on your side. I will pay restitution for that. I will pay blood money so you don't have a grudge anymore, and do the same thing to the other side. There are a number of instances of people doing that in Jahiliyyah outside of Quraysh, and apparently Quraysh did that more than others because of their kind of prestige among other people. They would settle disputes that other people had, and they would do it out of their own money. And it's said, according to some sources, that Abu Bakr was responsible for doing that. It's true that that existed in Jahiliyyah in Quraysh, because there's a famous poem in Jahiliyyah. Someone said it from another tribe, and a person did that. He settled a feud between two people, and he said, حَمَلْتُ حَمَالَةَ الْقُرَشِيِّ عَنْهُمْ وَلَا ظُلْمًا أَرَدْتُ وَلَا اخْتِلَابًا. He said, I settled it like a Qurashi. I settled the feud like a Qurashi did. So that shows you that that was a thing that Quraysh was known for doing. all of this here, the point of this is just background to help us get more context when we read the Seerah. I don't know that we necessarily want to, derive big moral lessons from what happened in Jahiliyyah. But one thing that we should see here is that nobody should ever say something silly like that it was part of the mission of the Prophet ﷺ to teach people democracy. Because they already had that. That already existed. Then that's existed probably ever since people have been on communities on this earth. In schools here, we're kind of taught to make us feel special that it was something nobody had ever thought of until this country was founded. And that maybe makes us feel special, but that's not true. And even the founders of this country, they were openly copying the things from the ancient Roman Empire. And so you'll see on the state seal of Virginia, there's a picture of the guy killing Julius Caesar and saying, "Thus always to tyrants," because they were angry at the British king. And it's people, sometimes some people, especially in this culture, they treat that word with a religious fervor. And sometimes it's not even clear what is meant by it. And it's almost like a kind of tribalism or a battle cry. But it's not something that is new, or it's not that complicated an idea. It existed in Jahiliyyah and existed before then. And in fact, Quraysh are even more democratic than this country. Because they're so democratic, they don't even have one president. I guess everybody's ego is satisfied that they're not, under anybody's authority, but there are downsides to that as well, that every household, every family is their own independent nation. They have to have their own army and their own president. There are downsides to that as well, and that's why sometimes some people will try living like that for a while and then decide they want a king. Like we hear that some of the Arabs did in Jahiliyyah when some of the blood feuds got too long. And we read in the Quran, and you read in the Bible, that the children of Israel, after Musa, they had judges. They didn't have kings. Until eventually they requested to have a king appointed over them. Why? Not having a king, or not having whatever name you call it, it limits the power of a people. You can't, if nobody is in charge, you can't take over another people. It limits your the influence you have. And we read that they requested to have a king put over them. And that has been the case in a lot of different times in history. And one of the first kings of the children of Israel was who? The king that's, well,
Pharaoh.
no, he's the king of Egypt. The king of the children of Israel. There was the one who was famous is Dawood alayhi salam. He was the king. And then after him, his son, Sulaiman. In all these different types of systems of organization, they existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There are the Arabs, as you can see here, who don't give submission to any king or any one authority. do you want to call it democracy? Whatever. There are nation states like the Roman Empire and like the Abyssinians, and there are kings or like feudal states like the different kings from Yemen. I don't know that it was part of the mission of the Prophet ﷺ to change any of that or to teach people a different type of political or economic. People can figure those things out for themselves. I don't know that the Prophet ﷺ was ever sent to have anything to do with that. The mission of the Prophet ﷺ is something else and something much bigger than that. And we'll see as a general rule, the Prophet ﷺ dealt with the people according to the customs and the traditions that were already there. And if the Prophet ﷺ did something differently, that's an exception and it's for a reason. Because there's some kind of moral reason that the Prophet ﷺ did something different. All of this is, again, background. And what led us to talking about this was we were talking about the first Muslims. And we talked about we talked about those who were in the household of the Prophet ﷺ, like who? Zayd. Before Zayd. Khadija. How can your sisters not? Khadija. Radiallahu anha. And Khadija is from what family? It's in if you look at the sons of Qusay, you see Abdul Uzza, his son called Asad. That's who Khadija belongs to. That's Khadija and Ali ibn Abi Talib and Zayd ibn Haritha. And we talked about outside the Abu Bakr. And if you look at there's 10 different tribes, 10 different clans that we talked about. There are 5 on this side, 5 on the other side. Where does Abu Bakr belong? To Taym. To Taym. That means Asma and Aisha they also belong to that family. We talked about a number of the earliest Muslims who weren't from Quraysh proper. Who were some of, besides the names that we already spoke about, you tell me, who were some of the earliest Muslims that you know of? Bilal. We talked about him already. Doesn't count. Astaghfirullah. Bilal is, he belonged to Jumah. If you look he belonged to Jumah. And it's worth putting that there were some leaders in Jumah, Umayyah ibn Khalaf and Ubay ibn Khalaf. He was owned by Umayyah ibn Khalaf. And we'll read about his fate later. Who else? We talked about Bilal, Ammar, and his parents. We talked about Al-Miqdad ibn Amr, who wasn't from Quraysh as well. But other than those we talked about, some of those who were actually from Quraysh, besides Abu Bakr, in the household of the Prophet ﷺ.
Uthman.
Who?
Uthman.
Uthman. There was Uthman ibn Affan. And Uthman ibn Affan, he belongs to, I think there's Affan. If you look when we talked about Abd Shams, Affan is the grandson of Umayyah. So he belongs to Abd Shams from Abd Manaf. They say that he embraced faith at the invitation of Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu. Who else? There's Umar, radiallahu. Umar, it's kind of like with Umar, radiallahu anhu, is the last one mentioned. He's like the line between the earliest Muslims and the rest of the Muslims who accepted Islam in Mecca. Because when he accepted Islam, that was like mark it down in your calendar, that was a new page was turned. But before Umar.
His sister.
His sister. Okay, so that if you can put them under Banu Adi, in those lists of the 10 tribes. His sister, what was his sister's name? Fatima. Fatima bint Al-Khattab. MashaAllah. MashaAllah. One thing that's, subhanAllah, it's not usually known, is his brother as well. His brother's name was Zayd. See, subhanAllah, Omar is, that's not how things happen. But Omar is known by everybody. He's known by every single Muslim, and even those who aren't Muslim. He had a brother whose name was Zayd, and Zayd became Muslim before he did. And Zayd was in every battle, every campaign that the Prophet ﷺ went out on. And Zayd, he's Zayd ibn Al-Khattab. He was martyred on the day of Yamama under Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. But in the eyes of people, he's not as prominent as his brother was, even though he was a Muslim before. And they say Omar used to really have strong affection for his brother. And they say in the time of Abu Bakr, there was a rebellion from a lot of the different Arab tribes who had just accepted Islam. There was one person from one tribe who died as a rebel, and his brother said some poems lamenting his death that were very famous. They say that man once met with Umar ibn Khattab, and Umar said, if I was a poet, if I could say poetry, I would say stuff like you said about my brother. Now, his brother was on the other side, and he was killed. So that man said to Umar ibn Khattab, if my brother had died in the cause that your brother had died for, I wouldn't have felt sad about him. And so they said, Umar ibn Khattab said, no one has ever comforted me like you just did. No one has ever made me feel better about my brother than you just did. Radiallahu anhu. There's the brother and the sister of Umar ibn Khattab, his cousin who was married to Fatima bint al-Khattab. Who was he? His name was, he's famous. His name is Sa'id ibn Zayd. Sa'id ibn Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufail. And Umar is Umar ibn Khattab ibn Nufail. So that would put Sa'id ibn Zayd like his cousin, but like one level down. There's a name for that, but I don't remember. That's Banu Adi. If you look at Banu Asad, for example, that's where, if you have those 10 different families, if you look at Banu Asad, we already talked about one person, Khadija. Also, Az-Zubair ibn al-Awwam. Az-Zubair ibn al-Awwam was from Banu Asad. He was one of the earliest Muslims. If you look at Zuhra, the mother of the Prophet ﷺ is from Zuhra. Amina bint Wahab is from Zuhra. From Zuhra there was a man named Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. There was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. There was a man named, well, his name before he became Muslim was Abd Amr. And he changed his name to Abd al-Rahman. Who was he? Kind of famous. Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf. He's from Zuhra as well. That's Sa'd and Abdul Rahman ibn Auf are from Zuhra. Taym, we already talked about Abu Bakr. There's also Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah is also from Taym. If you look at Makhzum, and Makhzum, even though they're not from Qusay, eventually we will talk about Makhzum by themselves, because even though they're not from Qusay, Makhzum is very big and very influential. From Makhzum, there was a man named Abu Salama, and his wife, who was Salama, the husband and wife. There was a man named Al-Walid ibn al-Walid, who is the brother of someone named Khalid. Walid ibn al-Walid is also from Makhzum, one of the earliest Muslims. That's Abu Salama, Salama, Al-Walid ibn al-Walid. There is a man named Salama ibn Hisham, also from Makhzum, one of the earliest Muslims as well. Salama ibn Hisham had one brother named Amr ibn Hisham, and he had another brother named Al-Harith ibn Hisham. Amr ibn Hisham is known to us by a derogatory name, kunya. Abu Jahl. The brother of Salama ibn Hisham, Amr ibn Hisham, is Abu Jahl. There was also from Makhzum we'll deal with that later. From Jumah, there was a man named Uthman ibn Mad'un. He and some of his close family were also among the earliest Muslims. There are other names that will, inshallah, maybe I can provide a list of the names of these men and women who were the first people to embrace faith eagerly. Inshallah, in the coming weeks, we'll talk about some of the difficulties that they endured for the sake of their faith. And we'll talk about two people in particular who embraced faith, and when they embraced Islam, it was a significant turning point in a lot of ways. Those two people are,
Hamza.
yes, the one we said before,
Umar.
Umar ibn al-Khattab, and Hamza, who was the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. Also, one last name. Under Makhzum, there is Al-Arqam ibn Abi Arqam. Al-Arqam ibn Abi Arqam. And I want to make a point of mentioning him by name, especially in that period, because yes, because before they had the strength to appear publicly, he opened his house for them. And it's called in the Seerah Dar al-Arqam. And you will find even to this day, like different schools, they will take that name, Dar al-Arqam. And radiallahu anhu, it goes back to that's the house of this man, Al-Arqam ibn Abi Arqam, who was from Makhzum. Now, we'll stop here today, inshallah, and continue talking from here, inshallah, next week. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تدع فينا ولا معنا شقيا ولا محروما. ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد ربنا آمنا بما أنزلت واتبعنا الرسول فاكتبنا مع الشاهدين ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير.